This meeting is being recorded.
There we go. Okay, let's wait for Maylin.
Okay.
Are you back?
I'm back, yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, now that we typically consume my time with getting everybody onto the system, I'll be very brief and say that we have a very long and detailed agenda for today. You see it in the chat. Let me ask you to put it back in the chat again, Maylin, because when people log in, they don't see the older chats necessarily.
Yes. I've put the link in and now I'm going to put it back in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. So all of you are well aware that these meetings are intended to inform and to encourage further spread of internet and its use and its successful application. And so we're hearing from a wide range of people. And today, as been mentioned, a number of speakers are from Canada, interestingly. So we're going to start with Alex Wong, and that's coming from the ITU development activity. So Alex, if you're ready, we'll ask you to present first.
I am ready. Thank you, Vint. So first of all, Doreen Bogdan sends her regards. As some of you who follow ITU, this has been a week of council working group meetings, and I know they're discussing WTDC and where it's going to be and so forth. So I'll defer that to another conversation, but that was part of the order of business, so she could not join. So I, under the mandate or under the agenda item of giving a brief update on digital cooperation, this is by no means ITU only. This is, of course, the broader things that are happening in the UN. I'll really briefly then just recap what's happening with the roadmap work, which continues. I want to tie that into the work ITU is doing, which many of you joined one of the launch of the Partner to Connect Coalition. So to give a brief update, but we are tying that as part of also an input or as a follow-on to the roadmap. And then I'll just mention a teaser for the last agenda item, which, as some of you know, the UN is now ramping up preparations for under the Common Agenda, a Digital Compact. So on the first agenda item, a reminder, because I know there's always some newcomers on the group, that under the leadership of the Secretary General and specifically the Office Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, and Yu Ping, who's usually on this group, had told me she could not join because I'm sure she could give a more comprehensive update. We have these 8 working groups that were launched over a year ago now. ITU is championing 2 of the working groups on universal connectivity and digital capacity building. We have presented in the past what's happening in the universal connectivity, in particular, a presentation on the definition of a meaningful connectivity baseline. So that work is continuing. And also within the digital capacity topic, and I know next on the agenda is an update by UNDP, UNCDF on digital capacity building. So they may give an update on the work there. But briefly on those 2 areas, both working groups are still open for more participants. So anyone that's interested in what's happening in the roadmap, and you can go onto the website and read the latest, the roadmap document on these 2 areas. In global connectivity, the primary focus is still about getting the baseline for digital connectivity completed. I think that's on track, and we're hoping to have a next meeting of this roundtable group sometime in the next 1 to 2 months. And we've also been working on developing under item 5, a part of emergency preparedness and response, which I can't say that group kicked in on Tonga, but it would have been great if we could have, but of course that's the intent. So that work is continuing to develop. So I'll leave it at that. And then on the digital capacity building, there's been some really good progress with UNDP about completing the mapping of existing digital capacity initiatives, and now coming up with a concept note on how we can create a multi-stakeholder network. So those tasks are continuing. I'll leave it at that for this particular update in the interest of time. But for the newcomers on the call, that work coordinated by the Office, the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology is continuing. Okay, so Partner to Connect. I didn't introduce myself. So I'm the Chief of Special Initiatives, by the way, at the ITU, working directly under Doreen's leadership. So just an introduction on myself. And Partner to Connect Coalition is one of the big strategic objectives and priorities that we're doing now in the BDT at the ITU. And we're doing this as part of the contribution of the ITU to the roadmap and the rollout and the next steps. So some of you have seen various bits of this presentation before, so I would rather skim through this quickly and then you'll have the slide deck yourself. Our latest stats and figures, if anyone's looking for official stats taken from our 2021 facts and figures, you can crib them off of this presentation. So that's our new number is 2.9 billion that are offline. And here are some other just stats on gender, generational gap, urban-rural gap. So again, for you to use as you wish, these are all official figures from the ITU now that you can feel free to use in your presentations. So the P2C Coalition is a platform, leadership level platform to mobilize pledges, to be very blunt, to advance progress on connectivity and digital transformation. And with a focus on, but not limited to, least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and a small island developing states. This slide goes through, of course, why now is important. I mean, it's always important, but you know, this of course is relevant because of the LTC5 conference that's been postponed, unfortunately, but that remains a major milestone. And of course, the overall attention of the UN on the digital agenda is really timely right now, and I'm sure many of you on this call are involved. So as some of you have seen, we have the 4 focus areas that have been developed: access, adoption, value creation, and accelerate, with the sort of tagline of connectivity, empowering communities, building ecosystems, and incentivizing investments. And again, I won't go through the slides, but each of these focus areas, we have working groups, again, open for any of you to join on. We have leaders of the working groups, and you can see the leadership group, and they're all intentionally designed with a private sector leader, a government leader, a UN or foundation leader, a youth leader, and an NGO or civil society representative. And I know some of you on this call already are involved on the Partner to Connect, but each of these 4 focus areas have been flushing out what we call the pillars underneath. And so this is again highlighted on the slide. For example, on this first focus area, the pillars underneath this are related to the infrastructure, the affordability, and cybersecurity. And then we tie each of these focus areas to the relevant roadmap roundtable area in the SG roadmap. So the second focus area under empowering communities is really focused around the pillars of skills, digital inclusion, and relevant local content and services. And again, you can see the leaders involved. The third focus area on building digital ecosystems is comprised of the pillars related to digital innovation and entrepreneurship, applications and services, and the digital economy. And the fourth focus area on incentivizing investments with pillars on innovative financing, project viability, and investor constellation. So ultimately, at a later point, Maylin and Vint, you know, we will want and invite this group to think about pledging, because we want everyone to consider this as a place to make a pledge, to make visible the commitment that you've made. We have some guidelines here in the presentation that talk about a pledge, but they all can circle around a financial, a policy, an advocacy, or a programmatic pledge. So we're creating materials that will explain all of that, and you know, happy to discuss this at a future gathering. And then finally, on the timeline, so WTDC represents where all this comes together, the World Telecom Development Conference, which is still planned for June. And you can see the various milestones that will take place, including next week, our second round of working group calls that are taking place January 25, 26, 27, 28. So if anyone wants to join, just send me a note and we'll give you the details. And then we want to use some of these upcoming events like the EU-AU event, Mobile World Congress, to continue to publicize this and gain momentum. One more thing on this is by end of February, we want to have the pledging framework, the action framework complete, and we want to have a big launch. And we have some signature pledges that we're working with on some other partners, some companies, some governments that we will be announcing. So we really want to start building momentum. So that last agenda item, the teaser, which was the common agenda and the digital compact, I think some of you are aware that February 21, 22, the PGA, the General Assembly, is having some initial briefings or discussions on the digital compact or the principles or some of the initial thoughts. Again, some of you may be involved. I really actually wanted to leave it as a teaser because I think it'd be appropriate for the Office of the Tech Envoy to maybe provide an update on this and what's happening on that in the next call. So Mei-Lin, for your consideration to invite Yu Ping to provide an update. And she knows that I was going to just make this brief mention to tear up for a future update. So I'll stop there on the sort of broader UN-wide as well as ITU relevant pieces and what we're doing. Back to you, Vint. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much, Alex. That's stunningly efficient. You got
Thank you.
So one thing I would like to suggest, Mei-Lin, is that we make sure we've captured some references so that we can get to Alex or get to in addition to his slides, so that people who want to participate in pledging, for example, know where to go and how to do that. So let me ask you, Mei-Lin, to make sure that that gets into a follow-up message.
I will.
Thank you for that. We're now ready for the next presentation, and that's on digital capacity building. And we're going to hear from Kezom Ngodo, assuming that, where is Kezom?
I am here. Hello.
You are here. Here you are. Thank you. Good. So please
so
go ahead.
Thank you so much, Win. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. And it was great listening to Alex's update. You know, as a strong collaborator together with ITU from UNDP side, and also on the Digital Compact, where we are participating as part of this digital cooperation process. I'm here representing UNDP, where I work as a senior advisor at the Chief Digital Office, leading our work on digital public goods. I wanted to just talk today about our work across our network of country offices in 170 plus countries on digital public goods. From our organization, our goal is that all citizens, including those at the last mile, especially the vulnerable people and women, benefit from improved access to public and private sector services that are enabled, of course, by national investments in and adoption of digital public goods in the local digital ecosystems and infrastructure. We could move to the next slide, and that's the only slide I have because I wanted to spend some time just talking about the areas of capacity building or building greater capacities for towards what we say digital sovereignty and global cooperation happening at the same time. So obviously achieving this, you know, shared vision with our member states really requires supporting and working with them to participate in digital cooperation on this really important agenda of digital public goods, you know, creating the global common goods, which are again important agendas for the Secretary General and for our administrator, while also providing that hands-on technical assistance in the countries. And this, of course, requires great collaboration with many of you who are here, colleagues such as Kate, colleagues such as Anir from different parts of the world and organizations. UNDP is a co-host of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, which was created in response to the Secretary General's Digital Cooperation Framework. And as you know, I mean, I'm sure you know this already, but I've just put that definition out there with a link. Digital public goods are defined as by the DPGA, open source software, open data, open AI models, open standards, and open content that adhere to privacy and other applicable laws and best practices, do no harm, and most importantly, help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So that inclusion and safeguard agenda is a really important one that's built into how we are defining and adopting the definition around digital public goods. We are witnessing fundamental shifts in the use of technology for public and private service delivery. The first one being the creation of shared technology infrastructure, such as what we see in countries like India, what we heard from Arvind, I believe in the last session or so, that can be leveraged by both public and private sector to unlock a range of, you know, innovative services for individuals, for businesses, for governments. The second is this movement towards, or this fundamental shift towards connecting disparate systems, whether it's MIS systems for cash transfers, whether it's payment systems, etc., to enable greater interoperability, which is, of course, then subject to appropriate security and privacy safeguards. And then the third is this element of governance and community engagement, which is, the strong emphasis on safeguards, privacy by design principles in the platforms, but also in the regulatory and enabling environment governing both the tech stack and the rules of engagement. At UNDP, we are focused on 5 areas of capacities that I wanted to kind of share with you today, just because these 5 areas are really drawing on the insights of developing and implementing digital public goods in low middle income emerging economies, whether it's countries like India that I just mentioned, but also countries like Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, as well as the great work that Anir leads in Bangladesh with A2I. The first one is around, the customization of digital public goods. They should be understood as more than the generic code base, but ones that can be deployed through implementation according to specific country needs. And its success, therefore, really depends on more than the technical implementation, but requires that roadmap, that vision of what countries want to achieve. And I believe that's a really fundamental piece of sort of capacity building and advocacy that we see as really important for the wider use and the unlocking of benefits of digital public goods in many of the countries where we see strong demand. And, COVIN in India is an implementation where, I think 70% of the budget was on non-technical spend, activating 300,000 plus additional vaccination sites, which enabled above a national average immunization in rural and hard to reach areas. So really sort of understanding, I think, the customization of DPGs in the local context, but also knowing that the implementation is where the details and the hard work is. And that's where the capacities are focused around that vision and implementation building capabilities. The second is that there's a clear demand for implementation opportunities, and many countries are seeking support on how to get started. So committing to incorporating digital public goods into national development planning processes is a critical first step. But success, requires understanding the alignment of this commitment with government's broader goals. Facilitating those commitments through strategic planning is a powerful tool for progress, as well as a tangible starting point to accelerate the DPG implementation. And that includes sort of moving from vision to procurement policies and more of the tactical elements of areas that need greater capacities. The third is that naturally, while considering digital public goods, these are the system level changes that really requires a whole of government approach, which is quite new to many of the countries. And an example I can give you is when the government of Philippines was implementing digital public infrastructure on identity, it needed to move the conversation beyond just the statistics authority or the identity authority to include various departments of the government. And now several cross-functional use cases are being conceptualizing through this whole of government, whole of society approach. And again, this is where I think, capacity geared will strengthen that digital sovereignty and greater cooperation. The fourth capacity is capacity building. We see that as a foundational building block for successful implementation, especially for things that are at the infrastructure level. And there are several considerations to these broad capacity building needs. For example, for governments, the first step to knowing where the skills and the resources must be strengthened in articulating a vision for their digital infrastructure. But generally, it includes, of course, ensuring inclusivity and human rights consideration that are built into the implementation, outlining what data sharing means, establishing safeguards within the digital architecture, etc. It also means capacity around working with different stakeholders, such as procurement, vendor management, and the technological capacity to supervise the implementation. And then lastly, the capacity around the ability to visualize and set the legislative and policy frameworks for the governance of national scale infrastructure. The last capacity or area of capacity is around how do we attract and retain local talent, which is really important to building those local digital ecosystems and partaking in, in sort of new elements of digital that are emerging, such as Web3, and understanding, the risk and the benefits really. And I think, we'll hear more from Anir, but the government of Bangladesh has done this remarkably well with A2I, which is a joint program with UNDP. And it shows how local innovation hubs can become really important enablers for building local talent, as well as provide that ongoing support to DPG implementation. And it helps remove some of the dependency on global companies as vendors, while also fostering that services and innovations locally. So in summary, just wanted to say that these are 5 areas we've elaborated quite a bit as part of the Davos agenda, which is in the link of this slide. We know that digital public goods is unfolding at an international scale, and it holds great promise to accelerate the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by including more people, by enabling good governance and service delivery, and creating new tools to respond to urgent challenges. And as we move these conversations forward, there will be lots of questions at what level should we be having some of these discussions at the country level in terms of how we anchor our support and collaboration with them. And I do hope that some of the early insights that we're bringing around the lessons can help advance some of the conversations to ultimately forge better and more inclusive societies. So with this, I hand it back to you, Win. Thank you so much again for having me.
Well, thank you very much for the quick summary and staying on time. 2 points to be made before we hear from Declan. The first one is that open source is not always your friend. We've discovered that it has bugs and that people depend on it, and it creates a lot of cascade failures. So we should be very thoughtful about how we use open source. Second, the term digital sovereignty and data sovereignty can sometimes be used to, in fact, fragment the internet and build barriers to the free flow of information. We need to be conscious of that, because if we want to share digital public goods, we need to have the ability to move that information freely from one part of the internet to the other. So just a couple of reminders. We now have an opportunity to hear more about the African Union Summit, which is coming up in February, from Declan Kiran. So Declan, you're on.
I don't think he's on. He said that he might be in a delay. So if we could move on, and when he does join us, we'll bring him back in.
Anir, if we could hear from you, that would be very helpful.
Thank you very much, Vint. Let me share my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Melin. Thank you, Vint. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to talk about what we have done in Bangladesh. And as Kizum just pointed out, A2I is a UNDP-supported program of the government of Bangladesh, which was initiated at the Prime Minister's office in 2007. So it's been 14 years in the making. Now it's across the entire government, across all ministries, all districts, all sub-districts, and also all local government institutions, about 8,000 of them across the entire country. Let me talk a little bit about what has happened. When we started out, one of the early things that we did was look at the internet penetration. It was less than 1%. Actually, when we started out, it was probably less than 0.5%. So 2009, we went up to maybe about 1%. Now it's about 65% or so, the country. So we were looking at alternatives to reach our citizens around internet, because internet was not obviously in the hands of common people around the country. So we looked at mobile phones and we saw that since 1932, we had purchase orders to our sugarcane farmers going on small pieces of paper, which enabled corruption, actually, because the bigger farmers would get the work orders ahead of time. And since you get paid by the weight of the sugar canes, the bigger farmers would always win because they had the unholy collusion with the mill authorities. So we replaced that with the $5,000 investment to put in an SMS server, a text message server. We realized that about 90% of the farmers had access to mobile phones of this kind, not the smartphones, the bar phones at that time. Also, we did not have Bengali or Bangla SMS, not SMS in the local language. So we had SMS in English. So one of the difficulties was that how would they be able to read the SMS that we sent? But we took advantage of what is called indirect literacy. Somebody in the household or in the neighborhood would be able to read English, maybe a third grader or a fifth grader, and they'd be able to read what's in the SMS. And we saw about 200,000 sugarcane farmers within a year get this benefit. They'd be able to bring their sugar canes to the mill, getting around corruption. What we call TCV, time, cost, and the number of visits. This is how we measure inefficiency in our service delivery. That got reduced significantly. And everybody won, except for the people, vested interest groups who actually lost money in the process. But the yield in the sugarcane industry actually went up by about 13%. This is just one example of how we use technology, whatever was in the hands of our common. Then we looked at what we call the assistive process, so bridging the analog citizens to the digital world. So we started digitizing a lot of public services at that time, but we still realized that people were not able to access these services. So what we created was digital centers, and the then administrator of UNDP, Helen Clark, was in Bangladesh in 2010, and we launched 4,500 digital centers across the entire country, and that covered every single local government institution at the village level. So the model is that these centers are run by entrepreneurs, one male, one female, and they serve citizens with public services and also private services. So right now, the number of services that are delivered from these centers are about 325. We started with just one service at that time, birth registration. Now, more than half the services come from the private sector, banking, a lot of safety net services from the government, e-commerce, from many different e-commerce vendors. And we have provided about 700 million services from these centers. 16,000 entrepreneurs run these centers now, and the number of centers has almost doubled since then to about 8,363. And a lot of them are actually in the purely private sector. So this is a bridge between the analog citizens and the, as I call, the digital service world. Another example, this is the one actually uses the internet, is our national portal, which is the largest whole of government implementation in the world of Right to Information Act. So 51,000 offices of the entire government are connected to this one portal across the entire country. So this is down to the level of villages. About 8.5 million content and 600 plus electronic services are also part of this. And we have about 400,000 visitors visiting this almost every day. We have citizens' feedback coming in through this portal as well. So this is a tool to reach the entire citizenry of the country over the internet, now that we have about 65% plus penetration of the internet. What we found out during COVID, in the last almost 2 years now of COVID, in the initial months into 2020, the months of April, May, June, that still we had very deep pockets where internet did not exist or was not affordable. So that's where we launched the national helpline 333. It had already existed to serve citizens on specific information on government services since 2018, but we relaunched it as a Corona national helpline. So since then, we've seen millions of calls coming in. A lot of them got connected to thousands of doctors. We had an invitation to the doctors that they would provide free service, free telemedicine service through this through this national helpline, and thousands of doctors joined. We would have doctors at every hour of the day, every hour of the like 3 hours of the morning, providing help. We had emergency food calls. A lot of people who were locked down in remote areas of the country needed food support, emergency food support. 7 million calls came in just to provide food support. A lot of people used this to buy necessities. So we introduced what is called P-commerce, phone commerce, because e-commerce was not available to many people in the country. We also saw emergence of new types of services to this. So a lot of child marriage calls came in. So people would call in and say child marriage was happening because it actually increased significantly during the pandemic because of school closure. And we saw many child marriages were stopped just having calls coming into this. And about 23,000 are social challenges, which were food adulteration, many other things. So this is another mechanism beyond the internet where we saw providing digital help to citizens. One important thing, Kizum pointed out something, we have a very strong network of, as I said, digital centers, but also banks and mobile financial service providers across the country. MFS is probably the largest in Bangladesh right now, the fastest growing around the world in Bangladesh. And just before the pandemic, luckily we introduced something called the eKYC. So electronic know your customer on web, mobile, and contact center. And this really helped us identify deserving citizens to provide the services that they need at the right time. In parallel, we've been simplifying services in parallel to digitization. So about 600 of the government services have been simplified, which basically means we have eliminated unnecessary or legacy steps within the service delivery process. That has also improved TCV numbers. Just a measurement of the last 10 years, about 1,000 or so services that have been digitized, and many of them have been simplified. We've saved about 12 billion days, about $16 billion, and about 7 billion visits have been eliminated by introducing digitization and simplification. And this is something that we measure through this tool called Annual Performance Agreement, which is a contract between the Cabinet Division, which is the super ministry governing all other ministries, and every line ministry. So this APA, Annual Performance Agreement, is a contract between Cabinet and the line ministries, and that's how we actually measure improvement in citizen service delivery. Something I'd like to mention very quickly, something we introduced 7 years ago called empathy training. And this is where we have seen thousands of civil servants going through this process. So this is a design thinking capacity development workshop where they understand the needs of the poor. This is one example I wanted to mention here, a doctor from one of the southern districts who came to the workshop and understood for the first time that 2,000 of his poorest clientele don't come to his clinics because they don't feel that they will get the service. They get pushed around, they don't wear the right clothes, the security guards won't let them in. So he created something called a VIP card, which is a paper card with a digital database and a VIP line for the ultra poor. So that's how he now serves his clientele, those 2,000 families. And the government of Bangladesh, specifically the Ministry of Health, is looking at this as a way to do universal health coverage and health insurance. We have actually used social media quite effectively. So every district and sub-district administration features a Facebook page where a lot of grievance redressal are happening, and pictures are taken from those social media pages, Facebook pages, and they're posted on government letters to actually address this. In 2020, one of the last bastions of analog service actually fell, the court system. We've been working with the Supreme Court for the last 5-6 years with very little progress. So COVID actually accelerated digitization. And we saw, because overcrowding was happening in prisons, because we could not do bail hearing, and we already had overcrowded prisons, it was increasing. So we introduced something called the My Court, where virtual hearing was happening in the Supreme Court using digitization, using video conferencing and other tools. We actually put this together in 12 days. And that reduced overcrowding in prisons by about 11% in 2 months last year. Something for Vin to take a note of, we're working very closely with Google to improve our flood forecasting. So this is a big data analysis platform that we're getting a lot of help from Google. Yossi Matthias is the person who leads this effort within Google, and our Water Development Board and the Ministry of Water Resources, Ministry of Relief, they're all working together with facilitation from A2I, my program, to develop better and better flood forecasting. One of the things that I discussed with Yossi is whether we can actually do better cyclone forecasting using big data as well. Trying to address inclusivity for persons with disability across all our initiatives, all our portals, all our digital reading materials, e-commerce, e-learning platforms. So this is an initiative that focuses on just disability issues. Before I end, I'd like to talk about 4 areas where we focus on right now, and I call them policy Legos. So in the last 14 years or so, we built these building blocks that come together and allow us to do rapid innovations across the entire government and across society now. So first is the focus on universal accessibility. So direct access, assistive access, focus on disability issues, and focus on massive digital literacy and massive communication around that. Second is capacity development of the service provider. So this is where primarily we've been focusing on the government, but more and more now we're focusing on the private sector as well. So focus on design thinking with the citizens, institutionalization of e-services through what we call innovation teams. So every ministry, every directorate, every district and every sub-district has an innovation team. So about 1,000 innovation teams are working together across the country within the government. We're also looking at 2041 as the next mark. 2021 was our target to become middle income country, which we achieved. 2041 is the target to become a high income country, another 20 years. So we are reorienting our civil service thinking and capacity towards that target. And also local IT industry development is one of the foremost areas that we focus on. Digitization tools, we have a process to do rapid digitization, which allows us to do about 50 services every month, digitize 50 services every month. A custom digitization, which is a more involved process, which about 50 services per year. We're using more and more artificial intelligence and big data analytics in our work, and blockchain. We just started exploring blockchain. And DPG is something that Kizom talked about in depth, that we're working very closely with Kizom's team, Robert Ops team in New York, to turn all our digital Legos, the policy Legos, the digital assets, into digital public goods. So the different components that we have built so that this can be used not only within Bangladesh by the private sector, but also in other countries. We're already working in half a dozen countries where some of the digital assets that we built in Bangladesh are being leveraged in those countries in Africa, Asia, and also South America. The last slide, 6 things that we have seen happen in the last 14 years of our work. The roles between citizens and government really have reversed. So citizens now don't come to the government goes to citizens to provide services, and more of that's happening. Big bang approaches have not worked. So a lot of small initiatives that grew into large initiatives by the government, by the private sector really helped us thinking from a bottom-up process. The digital center that we talk about, 8,000 of them across the country, really started in 2 locations with the local communities. Breaking of silo, very important that we have seen. The positioning of A2I, the A2I program at the Prime Minister's office and then cabinet really allowed us to break silos across the entire government. If it was just the ICT ministry from the very beginning, we would not have been able to do that. And now we are breaking silos across society as well by working with 40 different industry associations ranging from garment sector to ceramics to and leather and everything. The business model that we are trying to work on is reducing subsidies. So developing a very interesting public-private partnership model. The digital center that I talked about is a public-private partnership. These entrepreneurs don't get paid by the government. They actually sell services, both government services and private sector services from these digital centers. So they have earned about $70 million in the last few years just by selling services. This concept of entrepreneurs is something we're trying to promote within the government and also within private sector, is that just like you have entrepreneurs in the private sector, it's really a private sector term. We're trying to create policy entrepreneurs. So government officers who think like entrepreneurs, they form coalitions, they raise money, they actually measure progress, measure inefficiency, and then actually show, and they compete against each other. So we have dashboards across ministries, across districts, and Prime Minister actually gives out service performance awards at the end of every year. And the last but not least is the increasing use of data and analytics within decision making within the government. So this is a new area we're still trying to figure out, but COVID has really accelerated the use of data, whole of government data and data from the private sector with the government across the entire sectors. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Anir. I must say that was one of the most information-packed presentations I have seen in a long time. So thank you so much for that. We have a few minutes actually for some discussion and questions, and I'd like to suggest one very interesting exercise, and that would be to compare what's happening in Estonia with what's happening in Bangladesh in terms of digitization of government services. And so perhaps at some point we might organize an interview between you and a similar counterpart in Estonia just to compare experiences and see what works and what doesn't. So there's time for questions for Anir if anyone would like to pose them. Yes, Joseph.
Yeah, Anir, thanks. Really impressive what you've done since 2005 when I had several visits. The question which I have is, how much are you framework driven? How much are you setting the frames for like your public-private partnership, for the empowerments and so on and so forth? And how much do you leave that over to the market to solve?
Frameworks are emerging. So what we have learned since the very beginning is that we try to take existing frameworks, both for technology and for partnership and for economic or business models. And existing frameworks did not work as well. So we had to test out new things and be very agile and humble in our process. The digital center example that I keep talking about, the 333 that emerged recently. So these are all examples of public-private partnership that we had to test out. And involvement of community, there is a lot of pressure to make everything completely public. So a lot of the digital centers really want to become completely public process or public institutions, but we kept it very deeply public-private partnership. In terms of technology, we actually study Estonia on an ongoing basis. We study India on an ongoing basis, what's happening there, and we develop, we take a lot of the process, a lot of the technologies, and also a lot of the frameworks from Estonia and India for the most part. In terms of developing frameworks for civil service, which is very important, thinking or rethinking, reimagining civil service, we take a lot of help from Singapore, how they have reoriented their civil service. So we learn from many other countries and take frameworks from there.
Thank you for that. Dorothy, you're next. Dorothy Gordon. You need to unmute.
Thank you, Ben. He kind of answered the question. Anir, thank you for the presentation. Excellent. I'm just looking at this as really interesting to see something happening right now. But how are you preparing for the future? Is there a lot of formal training involved within the public service to reorient people to this whole of society approach? And is that being translated into the kind of training and orientation that public servants would be receiving for the ones who are now coming on stream?
Very important question. What we have seen is that two important things. One is that training itself does not have the desirable impact. You train and in the allow the trainees to fail. I think that's important. So we call this license to fail. So this is allowed from the Prime Minister's office, now from the cabinet, and the civil servants are allowed to try out something and then fail. Recently, this year, since 2021, not this year, last year, 21 January, we started embedding different types of 4IR technologies, fourth industrial revolution technologies such as AI, blockchain, in different government processes. So the training happens there is that there is a formal training process. We identify a specific project, which sometimes we fund from A2I, sometimes they find their own money within the ministry, and sometimes in partnership with the private sector. And they go ahead to implement that project. So this is a process we started in 2008 called Quick Wins. We started with 53 Quick Wins in 53 ministries. Most of them failed. And that created enough confidence that it's okay to fail, but it's important to learn. So that's one thing. Second is, it's important to create collaboration across multiple ministries. A lot of these projects are actually multi-ministry project missions, not just a project, but missions. And it's important to have that collaboration. So training itself does not have the desired impact. You actually have to allow the trainees to try out things, fail, and collaborate with others within the private sector. So we are formalizing a lot of this, keeping some things informal. One of the things that we try to do is to not to over formalize, because formalization sometimes makes things rigid.
We are at time, but Gora, if you have a short question and maybe Anir a short answer, we can fit this in. So go ahead, Gora.
Sure, I'll take my long question offline. Comment is congratulations on the 2021 achievement and looking forward for 2041. Absolutely fantastic. My forefathers would be happy to know that from Borishal. Question is standards. How much of standards are you incorporating in your work?
Not a whole lot. And as we do DPGs, so KISM is really helping us to become a lot more standards oriented. So obviously the standards that come from by adopting different technologies, we adopt them, but sometimes you don't have to follow standards. But now as we build DPGs, we've figured out that we need to follow standards a lot more. And that's where the focus towards DPGs is twofold. One is to become more robust in our implementation, so that what we do allow others to build on top of that within the country. And the second focus is also to help countries or work with countries that have been in similar situation in Bangladesh and that want to leapfrog, which we have done.
Only afterthought is you are right now connected over Wi-Fi on this session, which is an IEEE standard. So standards are the enabler. Keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
We'll talk more.
We'll talk more.
Yeah, thank you for a very candid answer to that question. We need to move on now to Miguel.
I'll send an updated set of slides. The one that I used just now is updated from the one that I sent earlier. So I'll share that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank
so
you.
now we move to Miguel Gamino, who is connected with the enterprise partnerships and the head of Global Cities and City Possible. So Miguel, the floor is yours.
Yeah, great. Do you want me to share screen also?
Yes, please.
Okay, give me 1 sec here. We're all doing the dance, right?
This is always a terrible test of your skills of using systems. And there are so many different ones that we all have to remember how to do each one of them.
Yeah, the real challenge is making sure I'm sharing the right screen in the right window, right?
It says Innovative City of Tomorrow, and you might want to go into presentation mode if you can.
Yep, that's what I'm working on that exactly. At least I'm off mute.
You are off mute. That is correct. We can hear you.
Hang on a second. It's not the presentation mode isn't going. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Hang on. Give me 1 second.
Whoops, that went away.
Yeah, and I have to, because I have multiple screens, it's a long story. I have to share the screen first.
Yeah.
I mean, presentation mode first and then share it.
And then share screen. Yeah. We've all been there.
I will just jump in the space and say how excited I am to actually bring cities to this discussion. That so much we've talked about different countries, but I think what Miguel is doing, and actually also UNDP in their city to city network, we'll have more on cities in future future sessions. Back to you, Miguel.
Yeah, so I think I got it as close as I can get it for now. Hopefully this is easier to
Yes,
see.
I can see that. That's
Okay.
good. Thank you.
All right. So yes, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you. I've already learned quite a bit just listening in. So thank you even for that, being able to just participate as an observer in some of the other discussions. I'm excited today to share with you our approach to cities engagement. And I don't know what sort of background or bio has been shared with you so far. So I'll give you the short version just to make sure everyone knows who I am and why I'm here, and happy to follow up with any more detail as needed. But I am Executive Vice President of Enterprise Partnerships at MasterCard, which is a group looking after unconventional partnerships, markets, and opportunities to have impact, but also commercially viable. So I'm not philanthropy. I have counterparts who are philanthropy who do have involvement in some of what I'm going to talk about, so we can clarify that along the way or in the Q&A. So I am on the business side of MasterCard, but we don't sell directly to cities or governments very often, close to never. Nothing is an absolute, I suppose, but pretty close to never. And so we really do engage in a partnership framework, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. Also, both background and context. Before this job, I've been with MasterCard about 4-ish years. And before that, I was the CTO of New York City, CIO of San Francisco, CIO of El Paso, across the US, and cities of different demographic, but consistent in their challenges, if that makes sense. And so that experience very much informs what we've created. I was hired by MasterCard to build what I'm going to share with you today. So it is the program that I wish existed, frankly, when I was on the government side of the table. So it is very much coming from that perspective. So if you see those nuances here, for those of you that are on the government side, it is absolutely intentional. So one of the things that I just alluded to in my personal experience, and then we have seen be a continued trend across our City Possible network, which as of today, I think is about 325 cities worldwide in every region, on every continent, except Antarctica. We haven't found a city on Antarctica yet, but the minute we do, we will invite them to join City Possible. We also have private sector partners that are part of the solution team, if you will, in solving some of these things. And also academic partners. Primarily, our primary academic partner thus far has been Harvard, who help us convene various things. You'll see that later. And also what I liberally lump together under the banner of NGOs, but UN Global Compact for certain, but also IDB, other cities groups that we partner with that are sometimes formal members of City Possible and other times just collaborators. But the point being that we're not competing with any other networks or any other initiatives. We want to be a supporter, an enabler, a network of networks, making it easier for cities to engage with one another and with the resources out there in the world to help solve problems. And the reason that that's important is represented on this slide, and I've alluded to. The barriers are very similar, at least in my experience, across El Paso, San Francisco, and New York. Probably couldn't be 3 more different cities, at least in the US context. But my principal challenges and priority kind of goals were absolutely almost identical, frankly. The details were different. The resources available were certainly different. But the challenges principally were very much the same. And so that's informed this approach. And as our network has grown, both in size, but also global diversity. And by the way, and this sort of goes without saying, but when you reach 325 cities or so, they're not all what I call postcards. New York, Los Angeles, London, Sydney, Singapore, the postcard cities, the big cities are certainly part of City Possible, but we also have smaller cities in both developed and developing markets. So we very much are engaged and interested in that diversity of discussion in the city context. But we often find that challenges, at least in the macro sense, are very similar. They have barriers to resident engagement, some of which has already in different terms been expressed in the previous presentations. A need for better data-driven decision-making. Sometimes they don't have access to the data, or they don't have the access to the resources, talent or otherwise, to convert data into insights. And so that seems to be a very consistent, very high level, consistent challenge. Infrastructure for mobility, but really beyond mobility, is still very siloed in governments. And even the internal collaboration often suffers. And that exacerbates this also very universal situation of limited resources, because these first three things could help improve the way that resources are applied to problem solving and resident engagement if we were better at these other things. And so these have been kind of big areas of categories of concern that have been very consistent. So during the pandemic, everything I just said only exacerbated. It became more crisp and evident that it was an issue, including specifically this notion of the digital divide. And I want to also share with you all from a personal perspective, in all three of my governmental roles, I was, and I don't say this in a credit taking way, but more in a load bearing way. I was the champion of broadband access in all of those cities. And going all the way back to before I was in government, when I was a private sector startup entrepreneur, I made personal investments in what is still an online broadband network in the poorest per household income neighborhood in the United States on the US-Mexico border. And we gave those residents access to the internet personally in partnership with the government to some extent and other collaborators in the community. But this was 2001. And so the technology was not conducive. It was very expensive and very complicated and cumbersome. And the literacy also and the value to be extracted from that connectivity was also limited. I'm thrilled personally and professionally to see the evolution and to see people like you really focused on this. But I just wanted to share with you that it's been a mission of mine for the better part of my professional career. And all of those things that we identified way back then, and even in recent years as we built City Possible, became more important when we expected people to work from home, to educate from home. And I know I'm preaching to the choir literally right now, but I wanted to be super crisp with you that that we've had this in our concept from the very beginning and are very focused on considering this as we are talking with cities about how to help address their issues. And so City Possible, as this new model for urban innovation, and it is really leveraging the network element of bringing these partners together, the various priorities, the various resources and assets, and that frankly, the different roles that private sector, government, and NGO community and the academic community, as I grossly summarize them, have a contribution to make and a role to play in that. And they are complementary if we come at it with that approach, just recognizing and mutually respecting the fact that government has an authority and a capacity that the private sector doesn't. They can do things the private sector can't. And the private sector has resources and capabilities and interests that are valuable to the government that the government can't do on its own. Just to state one obvious example, but when City Possible has made it conducive to have those conversations in a very open and kind of trustful way that is focused on what we can each contribute to the solution. And that includes the digital divide that has become not only further impactful to the society, but to even our own employee base. We have people everywhere in the world, and their ability to connect and contribute to our business varies, right? Again, you all are the experts. So what we've done in response to this is built this framework. The network I've already discussed is really the convening power, the thought leadership engine that informs what it is we should be prioritizing and working on. We don't go into a lab somewhere or in a conference room somewhere and as MasterCard decide what we should be fixing for cities. Lots of other folks do that, maybe because they have no choice, but that is absolutely not the approach that we take. We invested first in this far left bubble of creating the network. We launched this network in 2018, just after I started in May. We launched it in November in Barcelona at the Smart City Expo World Congress. And at that time was 16 cities, 16, and just a couple of private sector partners. And now just a few years later, are approaching 350 or so, probably this quarter. And that's because it's delivering value. We wouldn't have that kind of uptake if it wasn't valuable to the cities. Oftentimes, the cities are finding value in just being connected with one another. We're doing nothing but facilitating interactions between cities that otherwise may not have encountered one another. They may not have had the venue to engage that way. And so that is absolutely the gem of all of this. What that leads to is the opportunity to co-develop solutions with other partners, with other cities, and always looking at the path to scale. So what we don't do is we don't go in, hear what one city says, assume that that's the only city that has that issue, work on that issue in a very bespoke way, and then start all over again tomorrow. When we engage a city and identify a problem, we ask that question: are there other cities that have the same problem or similar? Can we adapt our approach to the solutioning so that it is as shareable and scalable as possible from the onset? And so an example of that, in Honolulu at the US Conference of Mayors, we launched something called CityKey, which is the ability to combine identity, both digital and physical. So identification that is also payment capable, so for a financial inclusion tool, and also an access credential. So people who aren't paying for something, but need to gain access to something like a public service, a homeless shelter, any kind of service that's being delivered where they need to authenticate, but aren't necessarily paying for it in that presentation. So we created this based on this feedback and discussion we had with cities. We created it, launched it in Honolulu 2019. The pandemic hit. The urgency for that increased for different reasons we could never have predicted, which was now they needed a method to help people identify themselves, to be presented and gain access to services that were offered to them in response to the pandemic, but also get them financial support if they were being asked to shelter in home, to shutter their businesses, to do different things that were an economic impact. We created the platform so openly, intentionally, that it was readily adaptable to a pandemic that I certainly predicted, and by all accounts, nobody did. So that's perfect evidence of how this can manifest even in valuable ways that we didn't kind of pencil into the plan from day one. So this has led to this whole ecosystem of multifaceted engagement. So again, we draw on these convenings. In 2019, pre-pandemic, we had something north of 300 convenings or engagements in 1 year. So to give you a sense of the level of activity and diverse everywhere in the world. Some of those are big convenings. You'll see an example of that in a minute in Barcelona. Others are simply roundtables or Zoom sessions like this, but all were discussions about what are the challenges faced by cities, what are the priorities in terms of addressing them, and the partners we can bring to help solve that, which is obviously leaning on the expertise that we have, but also the experts of our partners. So again, this is not a MasterCard only thing. It's a MasterCard led thing, which I'll explain further in a second, but it's absolutely all about collaboration. In fact, I don't know if I coined it, but I hashtagged it, the modern version of that, I suppose. That collaboration is a superpower, and a superpower specifically held by governments, local governments, who aren't competing with one another, except for maybe tourism and sport. But when it comes to technology and resident service and prosperity and economic growth, they are all they're extremely willing, in fact, interested in sharing and collaborating with one another in a way that, you know, Pepsi and Coca-Cola never would in the private sector, which is why I describe it as the superpower held by the public sector. So we leverage that all day to provide expertise, but then collaborate and share across all of that. We also leverage our data and insights expertise I touched on earlier, but giving political environments objective data to support their issues. And those of you in that world know exactly what I mean by that. Things can be very tempered when they're held by nothing but political will. When you have objective elements to it, then it certainly helps with that. And then the knowledge development and sharing. This is an example, and I'm wrapping up. This is an example of how we show up sometimes big. We convene these experts. So when I say we convene it, I don't mean just on emails, you know, chats and things like that. We actually represent this in the real world, bring experts and convene the discussion and take away from that things that we can work to address and to solve. Again, I've already mentioned the scale of this and the diversity across the world. I don't know if you can see that on the slide, but those little dots sprinkled all over the planet are the cities that are part of or represented in the network. And so, you know, the summary here is my goal is to explain to you what you might not have known about MasterCard in this context, the framework that we've built, the openness that is core to its success and its DNA. And so take that as an open invitation to figure out ways that any of you can convene with us around the topics that you are focused on. And if there are cities that you think that are not represented that we should engage with, and you can help us make those connections, we would absolutely love that. This is intended to be a program for cities everywhere in the world of every look and feel. So thank you very much for the time. I know I might have gone a couple minutes long, but appreciate the patience.
Not at all, Miguel. First of all, I think mission accomplished. You certainly conveyed a very clear message about the nature of the program and also your open willingness to engage. So thank you for that invitation and for that presentation and for keeping us essentially on time. So all of those things are much appreciated. We're turning now to a Canadian update from Bill Tam, who is the co-founder of Digital Technology Supercluster, and Joni Brennan, president at the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. So we'll turn this over to Bill and to Joni.
Well, thank you so much, Vint, and it's great to have such a strong Canadian contingent. Thanks to Mei Lin for inviting Stephen. It's great to see you, Stephen. It's been forever since we've had a chance to get together. And the presentation today has two parts, and I think we can draft off of I think, you know, the theme about collaboration being a superpower. I think that was a great finishing point there, Miguel. I think we can probably elucidate a bit of what we're doing in Canada as well. And why don't I just turn to the presentation and we'll start there. And what we'll do is we'll do a two-parter so that I will provide a bit of an overview on, I think, one of the most exciting policy pieces that the government of Canada has put in place, which is the Supercluster program. But then I think because it is founded on collaboration, Joni Brennan, who leads the DIAC organization in Canada, is actually an exemplary case of how collaboration can be put to practice around digital identity. So without further ado, I'll just kind of go through it. Can you see my slides, Vint?
Yes,
okay.
We can see. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
But it's not on presentation mode. So
it is not on presentation mode. Okay, let me. I put it on presentation mode and you probably see too much
We
here.
see everything on the right side, your second slide.
Yeah, I don't think I need those notes. So
Oh, I
allow me
see.
to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing, but
Can you go to the display setting on the top,
uh-huh.
on the very top, on the left, right of
On-
show taskbar? On the top of
Okay.
his, yeah, go to the right, go to the right.
Go to the right display.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah,
Click
this
on
is
it.
a good example of a
Swap.
voice reading robot, which
Yeah,
is
click on the swap. Yep.
Swap
First one.
this one. Okay.
swap presenter. And yes.
Yeah.
So,
Excellent.
done.
Thank you. Excellent.
I'll
Learned
send you my
something
bill.
today.
I'll send you my-
Thank you so much. So maybe where I'll start is a little bit of background on superclusters in Canada. Without a doubt, I think every nation in the world has been taking a hard look at what the economic structure is going to look like in the next 100 years. And with the onset of sort of industry and the Industrial Revolution 4.0, we sort of set upon determining where the sectors and where the areas of the economy would be the strongest for Canada going forward. And so part of that exercise was to kind of discover where there's already a baseline or foundation for further strength. And through a series of sort of explorations and calls for proposal, whatnot, it ended up being that there were 5 superclusters that were created in 2018 to really execute on this mandate of building collaboration in some of the areas of potential strength for the country. And so we lead one of these 5 superclusters. It's a digital technology supercluster. It happens to be based on the west coast of Canada, but each of our superclusters is Canada-wide in our mandate. We have an agriculture supercluster based in our Midwest or our Prairies region. We have a manufacturing supercluster that's based in Ontario. And then we have a supply chain AI supercluster that's based in Montreal and Quebec. And then an ocean supercluster based in Atlantic Canada. Together, we have more than 7,000 organizations that participate in collaborations across the country. For us, our focus was really around accelerating the development, adoption, and scaling of digital technologies. And we had particular themes in mind. One was we were very focused on expanding the capabilities of the Canadian healthcare sector, really leveraging the use of data in a manner that could provide for better access, better outcomes, and ultimately technologies that could be exported worldwide. The second area is Canada's always had a long-standing strength in natural resources. With the onset of really looking at climate resilience and climate change in general, sustainability practices and whatnot, we saw a real opportunity to work with the natural resources sector in the area of digital transformation and how we can make that particular sector more sustainable over the long run. We also work with sort of the digital capacity building side, in particular skills and workforce, as well as looking at how we can drive prosperity through digital transformation of practically every sector of the economy. So those are the 4 areas that we're focused on. I think many of the folks in this meeting already recognize, just the evolution that we've seen over the last decade, and certainly exacerbated or accelerated as a result of COVID-19. I think the WEF, the World Economic Forum study showed, the business value is absolutely going to come from digitally enabled platforms. And at the same time, I think 87% of companies say they are experiencing skills gaps or expect to have them within the next few years, which really kind of represents a major structural change that I think we are just part of here in Canada to try to adapt to those realities. So the way that we work is really taking this notion of collaboration, but applying it very specifically around getting diverse capabilities and expertise to develop products that solve particular industry or government related problem sets. It's a challenge model in a way, but it has sponsorship on the demand side with adoption built right in. And what we do is we provide co-investment into the equation. We deliver a convening capability. We make sure that there's actors that can contribute different aspects to the solution. And ultimately, this is sort of a mission orientation around getting to the product sets that we're looking to achieve. So it is demand-based R&D. We accelerate that development simply by drawing more capital off the sidelines, by putting money to work and ensuring that with the multitude of players that we can bring into a collaboration that can actually accelerate the product outcomes. And ultimately, that technology adoption piece kind of starts with a handful of adopters within the framework of our collaborations. But our hope is that it provides a scaling advantage that can then go to multiple organizations and ultimately perhaps cross-sectorally. Just a couple of brag points that we have. I think we've been in existence for about 3.5 years, but so far we've co-invested in over 80 projects. Interestingly, in the Canadian context, SMEs is really prominent in our landscape. And so we want to make sure that small and mid-sized companies had a real role to play in these sort of exercises. So more than 70% of our investments have gone towards small, mid-sized enterprises. And in total, our portfolio of investments is now over $350 million in terms of value. And of course, the economic impact of this is really to look at how this translates into new products and services. New products and services is the lever by which we can generate economic activity. Also, the upside of all that is the creation of more jobs. So we expect to create more than 20,000 jobs. The value we see in these products could exceed $1.3 billion, could be higher than that, depending on sort of what the opportunity set looks like as knock-on products evolve. But I think one of the important things is how the IP that's created through these exercises lends itself to further exploration by other companies. So we spend a lot of time on creating and stitching together sort of this notion of shared IP for the benefit of creating new products. And this is a bit of a new regime, if you will, because I think traditionally that's been an area where individual companies have been very, very protective of that. But I think what we've done is created a mechanism for more organizations to look at how they can do more creative approaches to sharing or licensing or cross-leveraging that sort of IP. So a couple of quick examples, and then I'll turn it to Joni to share really exciting developments on the digital identity side. But in the health side, we have projects like the Autism Sharing Initiative, which is really about sharing health data for it's children with autism. So you can imagine the sensitivity about sharing health data. We found a way to do it in a secure and privatized way. I think that has been a hallmark for Canadian development, is really the governance models around data. We have new projects around using AI in sort of emulating how we can help people with their wellness and mental health, and then using 3D imaging and 3D imaging and applying sort of AI models to extend access and care to places where maybe there isn't a specialist. So we have a project in Telewound, which, as many people know, is a constant source of challenge for the healthcare system to manage wounds in most hospital settings. We also have projects that are in the environment and sort of in the natural resources spaces. One of the example projects is a project that we're doing. It's actually in conjunction with some of the nations in Southeast Asia. It's about looking at illegal fishing, using AI to really understand imagery and tracking of vessels. And so that's a very exciting project that we think will have tremendous impact in terms of how we can be more vigilant on our sustainability practices. We have projects with the mining sector, particularly so the aggregation of data to look at how we can kind of improve the environmental footprint of mining practices. This involves post-secondary institutions, scientists, biologists. It involves multiple mining organizations. The first such platform to really explore the microbiome and how you can actually use it, not just for exploration and extraction, but also on the remediation side. And then we have projects in the agriculture space, looking at how there can be more sustainable practices around the use of non-pesticides, about precision farming, regenerative agriculture. And so we have a number of projects in that area. We spend time looking at Canadian industry. So we have projects that tie to aviation, to forestry, to food supply chains, all of which have similar attributes of using data in a more structured and informative way to kind of drive decision-making, but also to improve sort of both the profitability of those industries and reduce the footprint that I think is encumbering our climate agenda. And finally, on the capacity building side, we are experimenting with new models. This is really quite interesting. Our attempt here is to look at how we can provide an interconnection between the needs of industry, how post-secondary and other educational institutions operate, and the people who are seeking to kind of move from one career path, or perhaps just seeking their first opportunity into the jobs of the future. And so we have a number of projects there that try to build those intersection points. And I think we've seen some really good success. A lot of this comes back to this idea of having a demand driver for what is needed. Oftentimes in our experience in the Canadian ecosystem, a lot of the work integrated learning or co-op pieces might really kind of create a siloing effect between employers and the education institutions. So what we tried to do is kind of build the bridges up front and design with purpose sort of the both the educational approach as well as the work integrated learning approaches. So, in summary, I think we are really focused on using collaboration as a mechanism to bring together expertise from a variety of different domains to improve sort of the health situation, both in Canada and abroad, to address the impacts of climate change, to drive productivity and growth, and ultimately creating more opportunities for people in the new and digital economy. And maybe with that, what I can do is hand it over to Joni, who can tell you a more concrete example of what we're doing in the digital identity space.
Thanks so much, Bill. What a really broad spectrum activity. It's amazing how much overlap there is among the various efforts that we've been hearing today. So Joni, you're on.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's great to hear from everyone who's been presenting today. So I've really been learning a lot, and it's a great opportunity to share. And the great work that's happening with Bill and the team, I think is really an example of that collaboration and how we work forward together. And I think that's been a theme for today. And so I'll go into a little bit about the collaboration that we're working toward within the DIAC, where we collaborate with organizations like the Digital Supercluster, and some of you who are in this call today, like MasterCard and others. We are a nonprofit organization, about 115 organizations who are working in and around digital identity and digital trust. And I think that when we think about that collaborative space, it was great to see some focus on the cities as well. In Canada, we're really a collection of governments, of provincial and territorial governments who have independence in some areas of our lives and also work together in other areas of our lives through our federal government. And so digital identity is one of those topics that actually is part of a federation, and how we work together. We have to work together as the public and private sectors to move this space forward. So we'll talk a little bit about the direction that we've been going there. So I'm not sure what this line is on my screen, but we'll just work through that. So DIAC is a adoption accelerator, and what we're doing is working to inform people, adding perspective, upskill teams, inform people strategy and tactics with regard to digital identity, which can be quite a complicated topic at times. And what we do is we really work to put the perspectives together around some key elements here. And so I'm also a former IEEE staffer. And so we really work on how do the standards fit together along with policy and governance and technology, all in the service of people. And so we see this as a kind of a puzzle piece effort, if you will, for how these pieces can all fit together, work together, and collaborate to move adoption forward. And for our purposes, it's really digital identity that helps to grow our economic opportunities and really helps to establish a bit of a social safety net, if you will, which we've seen is so important, through the pandemic. I want to take a moment to give you some of the Canadian perspectives in this space. And I would say that when we talk about digital identity, it's such a people-centered topic. But we often, don't necessarily talk to people about what do they think about digital identity? Do they understand digital identity? And so we've been doing year-over-year research for 3 years in our organization. where we've been asking people their thoughts and what do they understand. And so we'll share a little bit of that research from last year, and we'll be publishing new research the next month or so, and that's all publicly available, and quite some interesting findings. What we find is that when we've surveyed Canadians across our provinces, across our cultures, 9 out of 10 were very supportive of the concept of digital ID. Now, they did need some explaining for what that is, and we find that roughly half kind of understand concepts around digital ID. So there's a lot of education to be done. The groups that are most interested around what digital identity is and how it can help them is what we'll call is the sandwich generation. These are people who are caring for children in the home, maybe caring for older dependents in the home. And so they really have data and identity and needs and records to manage kind of on both sides, along with their own. And so these are the people who see the most value in moving forward for more digital ways of proving who we are, that we can, do from home or anywhere. 4 out of 5 Canadians believe that it's really important that federal government and provincial governments move forward around move quickly to enable digital identity. And this can mean issuing credentials like the information that's in our driver's license, which is a provincial credential, or the information that's in our passport, for example. And so people want governments to move quickly here in Canada on this topic. And then following along with our collaboration theme for today, we asked Canadians, should the move forward on digital identity be led by governments or should it be led by the private sector? And what we found overwhelmingly was that people felt more trust in governments and private sector working together. They really felt that through this collaboration, there would be checks and balances of each of those parties working together. And they also felt that in this way, digital identity would work for them everywhere. Small percentage wanted government to go it alone or private companies to go it alone. So real endorsement for that collaborative approach on digital ID. So I want to kind of take us back in history just really quickly to a New Yorker cartoon back in 1993 on the internet. No one knew that you're a dog, and we're kind of still in that situation today. It's very easy to be whoever you want to be, and people didn't know who you are behind that computer terminal, if you will. And so we've done some studies around kind of what scenarios exist today and what we're seeing around digital identity. And we'll take our little dog, and we do see a lot of movement around digital identity today in terms of platforms. And so these are the big Google, Facebook, Apple, and in this context, they still in the internet, still no one knows that you're a dog. So we're not really able to prove with verification who we are through those systems in a controlled way. We do see a lot of movement on operator networks. And so these are our banking networks, our payment networks, our telephone networks. And so the idea in these ecosystems is on the internet, how can you be a dog if you've got a bank account and a mobile phone? So there's a little bit of kind of verification through those third parties there. There is a movement towards self-sovereign or distributed identity, which is more about being able to present cryptographically signed data. And so maybe now on the internet, you could prove that you are that dog using cryptographically signed data. And we do see the space of open APIs, which are, sucking up data in the space. And here on the internet, we don't know if you're a dog, but we definitely know that you like doggy treats. And we see all 4 of these scenarios existing around digital identity here in Canada and arguably around the world today. So what we see as common challenges important for, I think, every organization in this call today has an opportunity to contribute. It's creating the right ecosystem conditions to move forward. A key pillar here is standards and standardization. We know that there is work being done at the national level, international level, and industry level in this space. So we really encourage that work to continue. But there are many parallel efforts happening. And so it can be complex to know which standards are important to this space for you and your stakeholders and where those convergences might be in that standards work. Here in Canada, we do see regulatory as being a space that needs attention. We do have a lot of regulatory policy with regard to privacy protection and data protection. What we don't have is very clear policy that explains what our expectations as Canadians or citizens or residents, people in Canada, how much should public sector data about us be available to us? And so there's a lot of focus on that private sector side and data and privacy protection, not so much focus yet on data empowerment to actually have the data and use the data for our own purposes that's in the public sector. So there's a lot of attention being paid there. And of course, promoting the right growth conditions in the space. And so in those 4 scenarios that we talked about, they're not the only scenarios at all. But we do see that it's important to look at sustainability for how these models are going forward. Are they sustaining themselves through access to data and that kind of an ecosystem in a marketing space, or are they sustaining themselves through subscriptions? So looking at sustainability is something we absolutely have to look at as we move from the Web3 world and where the world will take us, so Web2 world and where it will take us through the emergence of Web 3.0. And most importantly, inclusion. And so when we look at digital identity, we have to work to have better inclusion than we have in Web 2.0 and ensure that we have better access and that we don't exclude anyone from this process or don't exacerbate any of the exclusions that are today. So really pushing on that inclusion pillar for that growth ecosystem. Now I heard some questions about frameworks earlier, and the work that we're doing in the DIAC is to promote, develop and operate what we call a Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. And this is really about ecosystem interoperability. And so if those standards are defining specific methodologies within our framework, we can verify different standards in one ecosystem and how they may or may not work together. Open source plays an important role in this space. We're also able to bend and use this framework to verify how capabilities are functioning in different technology models. And so that's some of the scenarios, examples that we talked about today. Policy and governance is such an important space, and we know that we have work to do in terms of, and I think Vint was talking earlier, what does data sovereignty introduce? How do we manage ourselves within Canada, but how do we manage across borders and into other ecosystems with the EU, Asia Pac, and Africa and around the world? And ultimately, people. You have to have a people-centered approach. These are the ultimate beneficiaries. People will not understand all of this work that we're doing, and so we have to put people first and their needs and their benefits as we go forward in this collaboration together. So I'm really thankful for the time today. Hopefully I've kept us on schedule. And I really appreciate the opportunity to learn from this group. Thanks so much for having us. And thanks Bill and Maylin for the invitation.
Wow, thanks so much, Johnny. You did keep us on schedule, in fact, more than on schedule, remarkably so. So thank you for that. I couldn't help but notice that we're talking about dogs on the net, and FIDO is one of the standards groups. How ironic. Well, so thank you for that. We actually have a moment or two if there are any questions for either Joni or Bill, if anyone has any.
I just want to recognize that we probably have the largest proportion of Canadians ever. Alex Wong is a Canadian also, so welcome all Canadians. Diego has raised his hand.
Yes, go ahead, Diego.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. They're having fantastic. I have a question for Miguel. Basically, how do you engage with the politicians? How do you convince politicians to get into this kind of movement? Because I'm now working with a few mayors in Latin America, and and the only thing they are concerned about, of course, is the pandemic and now security. So we have to offer them solutions for those problems using technologies. So we have to kind of pack everything in that kind of wrapping paper, it's about security and the pandemic. But what kind of recommendations would you do to engage with the politicians, especially mayors?
So sorry, that was at me, right?
Yeah, that was aimed at Johnny, either one.
Okay, well, I can tell you what we do. We have an MOU that cities sign. It's non-committal in that it doesn't obligate them to do anything with us. It doesn't cost them anything. In fact, we don't even charge private sector partners, big or small. We don't charge anybody a dime to be part of City Possible. And that's on purpose. That reduces that barrier to entry. I think now that we have critical mass, that is also interesting to mayors, to be in a network with other mayors. And now we have the ability to demonstrate that we have authentically helped those other mayors solve problems, and we've built trust. So they don't, and I also, the very first thing I say at every meeting is I tell them, and again, this doesn't apply to everybody, but I tell them, I'm not here to sell you anything. I am commercial, and that's good for you because it's sustainable for me to be in partnership with you, because it does generate value for the business. But because our business model, we make money, if you will, in the aggregate, right? If we help a mayor create prosperity in their community, more people have better jobs, they make more money, they spend more money. Those in the aggregate are good for our business. So I point very openly. I guess the short answer to your question is transparency. But to be more detailed, I share very openly how I am financially interested. Why am I interested in helping you? For these reasons, and that puts them at ease. The other thing is, I'm not public policy. I'm not a lobbyist. We have public policy people who talk to them about legislative concerns. That's not my role either, and I say that very clearly. I'm happy to talk about it because I have experience in it, but I'm not here to lobby you one way or another. So it's the authenticity, it's the honesty and transparency to it. It's the collaborative reality of it. And now, that was harder in the beginning. Now that we have a body of work to use as reference, it's much, much easier. And I think that's why, number one, cities are coming to us in larger numbers faster. It's growing, the snowball effect has happened and it's growing faster, but also why some very big, well-resourced private sector partners are joining us instead of trying to recreate it, because we've done that hard part of establishing trust and whatnot. And that's also why, last point, that's why I don't charge anything to the private sector partners, because I hold on to that golden rule that it's not a place to just come and sell things. So we're very principled about that.
Thanks so much, Miguel. We're running a little short of time, but I do want to give Johnny and Anir an opportunity. I just want to point out that often transparency is your friend in many of these situations. So Johnny, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. And what a great question. It is very challenging to speak with government representatives, particularly when you have different orders of government, cities, provinces or states, and federal government, who are all have a role to play. So I would suggest a lot of education there. I would also suggest doing that research. This is why we've done that perspectives research. You can see a large portion of those people who really need or want these benefits, educating what the benefits are, but those parents or those sandwich generation people. So identifying who are the people who are really benefiting from this and those constituents. For Canada, this is the first year that we've actually seen digital identity specifically referenced in a minister's mandate letter at the federal level, and that has been a result of education and collaboration by DIAC and many organizations, including the Digital Supercluster and others, to help them to understand this ecosystem, understand where the government might take a lead or play a role in collaboration, that it is a collaboration. So I'd say keep up the education and keep up raising up people and the value to those constituents and the people from a social and economic perspective. And we're excited that we've seen this in our mandate letters for the first time this year.
Thanks so much, Johnny. Anir, briefly, please.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. In Bangladesh, we've had to actually merge different types of digital identities, starting with our birth registration, then health ID, then two types of education ID, one in primary school, another in secondary school onward, Then obviously our national ID, which appeared out of the voter ID registration process. Just would like to see if others are facing similar challenges. And now we are going towards the unique ID, which India has done with Aadhaar. But India actually created a new ID. In Bangladesh, we're trying to form the committee, National Steering Committee, of which I'm a part, with the head as the civil service head, the cabinet secretary. And he's trying to get about 18 different permanent secretaries together to come up with one digital ID. And we're struggling with that for the last few years, but hopefully we'll make progress. So any tips on that if you have merged IDs in other countries into one unique ID?
Thanks so much, Anir. And we are still more or less on time. Thank you to everyone for that. The last call, or last talk now, comes from Sonia Jorge and Ana Rodriguez on the cost of exclusion. Here, I think we really need to pay attention to this message because the digital divide is costing everyone, and it's something we need to pay attention to. So let's go now. I don't know, is it Sonia first or Ana? Audio is breaking. Sorry, it's Vint. Audio is breaking up badly. I can't even tell who's talking. And wow, it's Sonia, and I cannot hear you very well at all. It's completely broken up. Let me suggest that you drop off and reconnect and see if that works.
Could Anna start?
Sure, I can start while Sonia.
Yes, yeah, please do.
Let's see if with old, and not so analog, but analog wires it works. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Excellent. I
Yes, you
guess
can.
my AirPods had lost their battery. So thank you again, Vint and Mainline, first of all, to organize these amazing dialogues. It's been a great morning with wonderful presentations. Thank you all. So some of you already know us. In fact, some of you are our partners. Some of you are even on our advisory board, like Anir. So Anir, amazing presentation as always. We are the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and many of you know about our work, but just briefly, we are the world's broadest technology sector alliance that brings together public, private, and civil society organizations together to work on policy and regulatory reform to push down the prices of broadband internet access everywhere in the world, but with a focus on low and middle income countries in what generally is called the Global South. And we at the Alliance for Affordable Internet, as you know, because of our mission and because of the focus of our work, we remain very concerned about the growing digital divides. And in this case, we're going to present today with you the work that we've done because of our increasing concern and divide across the world, and how that prevents many women and girls in many low and middle income countries to benefit from the opportunities of all the amazing things you've all just presented today. From Bangladesh to Canada to many parts of the world, the reality is that these digital gender gap not only remains large, but in fact it has not budged. And so Anna, who's an incredible researcher, I'm very proud of our young women researchers on our team. Anna is one of them, who's the mastermind and the architect of these wonderful analytical model that we've developed to measure the cost of excluding women and girls from digital opportunity. So I'm going to pass on to Ana Rodriguez to present the findings of our research, and then hopefully we'll have a little time to talk about it. So Ana, on to you so we don't any time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you everyone for having us. It is a pleasure for us to be here today presenting this wonderful research. So I want to start with contextualizing us on the urgency of this matter. I know many of us know about this, but and it is well documented that women are disproportionately excluded from internet access. Worldwide, we know that 55% of men have access to the internet, while only 48% of women have. And this is worse in certain regions like Sub-Saharan Africa or Asia Pacific. And so this is what we know as the digital gender gap, and this is the focus of our research today on this research project. So for this research project, we sort of like divided in 3 parts. So we wanted to understand what has been the economic consequence of this digital gender gap in the past decade for 32 low and lower middle income countries. We focus on these low and lower middle income countries in A4AI, so we decided to keep focusing on this group of countries, and we selected 32 of them. And from there, we wanted to understand how this gender gap have behaved in the last decade. What's the current situation in 2020? We did this project last year, so it was 2020, the current situation. And then we worked on forecasting the situation onto 2025 to understand what will be the economic consequences of this digital gender gap if it continues as it is now, or if it improves. So the first thing was like, our question was like, okay, we know this exists, but how has this gap behaved in the past decade? Have governments have done any substantial actions or taken any substantial or done any substantial changes to change the digital gender gap or close it? And the answer was no. Unfortunately, in the countries in our analysis, we identified and analyzed that the digital gender gap hasn't closed in the past decade, and it has only closed by a really small number, only 5 percentage points, from 30.9 in 2011 to 30.4 in 2020. So unfortunately, we haven't seen any substantial changes or actions that could guarantee the closure of this digital gender gap. This is in line with some of our findings in our Affordability Drivers Index. We publish this index every year, and it's an attempt to measure how is the policy framework working towards affordable internet in countries around the world, especially in the Global South. In that index, we have a gender indicator, and that gender indicator receives the lowest scores every year. And we have seen that no many countries have developed any specific goals or strategies to actually close the digital gender gap. So we know it hasn't closed. We know it has actually stagnated in the past decade, but we went on to the focus of this research and analyzed what is the cost and the economic consequences of that digital gender gap. And we estimated that those 32 low and lower middle income countries have lost a total of $1 trillion in the past decade due to that digital gender gap. A huge economic loss for the whole economy, not only for women or those unconnected, but for everyone in the economy, boys, girls, men, and women. And now looking into the future. So we wanted to analyze as well, not only what has been that past situation and that economic cost of the digital gender gap in the past decade, but also understand what will be the consequences if these 32 low and lower middle income countries a digital gender gap, or at least do some substantial actions or initiatives to close that digital gender gap. So we see this as an opportunity that has been our past, but it shouldn't be our future. We encourage countries to close that digital gender gap and estimate that if they do, they will have an economic opportunity of $500 billion in the next years until 2025 if they manage to close this digital gender gap. So our invitation is for governments, and we have been talking about collaboration today. So we encourage that collaboration for stakeholders, different stakeholders, to work together to close that digital gender gap, from civil society to private sector to the public sector. We actually have a recommendation, a policy framework to actually work towards closing that gender gap, and we call it REACT. Our invitation is to include in those policies and a recognition of that the access to internet is a human right, and women should have that access and should have the right to access devices and the internet. We acknowledge as well that a main pillar of this is the education, so we encourage as well governments to take into account that education and skills aspect of accessing the internet and go with the skills and digital skills for women and girls. Work toward access, affordable, and maybe free access for women in certain parts of the world, so they can actually access an affordable internet and have the opportunity to experience all the power and all the opportunities that the internet has to offer. We have to take into account the content as well. In many regions, maybe there's no content relevant for certain subgroups of the country. So we encourage as well to governments to work in content, and that they should think about the different audiences and create content relevant for every sort of like subgroups. The policy framework as well encourages governments to set targets that are clear, but also that you can measure and follow up to see if you are going into the right direction. From our analysis, we identified that when women actually are given access, they can do amazing stuff. So our invitation and our reflection from all this research is to empower women through the internet and actually give them the access that they need. This was supported by as well on a report that we did, followed by the initial one with all the findings that I have showed. We did a West Africa report because we wanted to understand what's the situation there. And we analyzed Nigeria with a survey, and we confirmed that if women are given internet access, this can improve their economic, social, and mental well-being. They can have autonomy, as you can see here. Those that have internet access can do things like search products for a good or low price, open a mobile internet account, participate in social aspects of their lives, like connect with family and members, but also take classes or look for jobs online. And we have seen that the internet users are more prompt to do those activities than the ones that don't have access. Resilience as well. We included in our survey some questions around COVID-19, and we identified that women that have internet access are more resilient and more able to navigate this kind of crisis. We encourage you to look at, we will publish a South Asia report as well, including Bangladesh. So we encourage you to stay tuned and wait for that report that will have more insights into what are the opportunities that women have when they are connected to the internet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juana. That's great. So really zoomed by it very fast. So we missed a little bit of the content, but that's okay. We're coming to the close of the hour. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Vint and Maylene. And I'll put a couple of links on the chat so that people can follow up with us. We're very excited about these research, as well as all of the research on meaningful connectivity that Joseph was mentioning on the chat. So more through questions, and feel free to email us anytime. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sonia and Anna, and for emphasizing the economic importance of closing the digital divide, not just for women, but honestly, for everyone. And that point has been made in the chat as well. So a small reminder for Maylin, make sure you captured the chat as well as the recording of the video, so we can all share and reference it. I'm going to finish up and offer Maylin an opportunity to close this session, since you are the one who organized it. And I want to thank you on behalf of everyone on the call for doing all of this, because these opportunities to hear what other people are doing wouldn't happen without all of the effort you put into organizing things. So I want to thank you for that and let you have the last word.
Thank you, Vint. I think people can see the value of actually just coming together in this way. And I want to say it was Vint who taught me that you don't go to the institutions necessarily, go to the people in the institutions and bring them together. And I think that was part of the magic of the internet. And my last words, Vint had a quotable quote, which is transparency is your friend. My last word is, we want a future fueled by friendship. And that's what this gathering is about. Thank you.
Thank you. And amazingly, all of you have kept us literally precisely on time. So we look forward to the next session, Maylin. In the meantime, see you on the net.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ania. This was great. That was
Thanks, Madeline.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was blown away. I think it was really, really helpful. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Good, good. And I hope that you will actually be kind of part of my whole advisory council. To
Absolutely. I would be honored.
We have
be
to
honored.
spot all of these good examples, and then they can come here together.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I'll catch up soon. And
Yes.
I'll send you an email. that I've made.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we're going to close down. Okay. Bye-bye.